Something is dangerously wrong in the gig economy. Black and brown immigrant workers who make up the majority of the gig economy have been publicly lauded as essential or even heroes. And yet the shameful conditions under which they work demonstrates how corporations view them as disposable. Miserably low wages, non-existent safety nets, meritless terminations, and management by algorithm are just the most prominent features of the Orwellian dystopia that is app-based work.
For 3 years, Lyft was my primary source of income, and I completed over 12,000 rides. I was in my last year of my master's in divinity and beginning to start my doctoral program. And back in 2017, Lyft seemed like a godsend. They advertised a job with a feature of flexibility that would allow me to make money while also loaning me a rental car. I was in desperate need of a car and that so-called flexibility and began working.
Today's app-based or gig economy is frequently dressed up in talk about modern innovation and the 21st century of work. But in reality, this type of precarious contingent work is nothing new. There have always been jobs that are low-paying, insecure, and dismissed as unskilled. And workers of color have always been and continue to be heavily concentrated in these kinds of exploitative industries. The only difference is today, there are companies that now use a digital app to manage their workforce, companies like Uber, Doordash, and Instacart, and thus claim they don't have to play by the rules. The results is that these app-based companies have been able for far too long to shed responsibility for providing safe and just working conditions, through which workers can thrive on and off the job.
Over my time working for Lyft, I've seen many drivers become entrapped in the gig economy where app workers like me find ourselves in a constant cycle of working just to afford to keep working. Every passing year, I'll spend more and more hours of unpaid time waiting for rides and personally covering work expenses like gas and rental fees, while it became harder and harder to sustain a living.
Over the last 4 decades, federal policies have greatly eroded the bargaining power of workers and instead concentrated more power in the hands of corporations and those who already have substantial wealth and power. This has perpetuated and worsened the racial wealth and wage gaps and contributed to the ever-increasing degradation of working conditions for far too many.
Yet the harm to workers of color is the most critical component of this conversation. As Rebecca noted, these are workers forced into a system of precarious labor with no protections or bargaining power. Workers of color aren't clamoring for these jobs out of an entrepreneurial spirit. People are doing them to survive. And this is why it's really perverse, in fact, kind of sick, to say that these workers value the flexibility or freedom that app work provides them. It's really doublespeak.
When COVID-19 hit, it became transparent that gig corporations cared only about the bottom line. While workers were left scrambling in the face of a deadly pandemic, gig corporations like Uber petitioned to deny workers access to state unemployment benefits. That meant that an entire workforce was forced to choose between risking our lives to pay rent or sheltering in a home we might lose.
There's no flexibility in being deactivated, cut off from your income, not knowing how you'll pay rent or food. And tell me what freedom exists in working 80 hours a week because a company refuses to pay for your expenses and its expenses that you spend to do the job or the time you spend waiting for fares and unilaterally cutting your wages on top of that.
While gig corporations refused to protect their workers, they were quick to spend over $200 million on Prop 22, a California ballot measure written for and paid for by Uber, Lyft, Doordash, and other gig corporations. With Prop 22, gig corporations intended to upend labor protections and rewrite California law to make legal their exploitation of gig workers.
In fact, drivers in California are continuing to report shrinking wages. That's the exact reverse of what the companies suggested would happen during their $220 billion Prop 22 campaign.
The greatest irony of their Prop 22 campaign was that the very corporations that were spending millions to deny their majority Black, brown, and immigrant workforce access to life-saving benefits and wages were also trying to position themselves as leaders in the fight for racial justice. To trick voters to support their campaign, Lyft ran ads, quoting Maya Angelou's poems, and Uber bought billboards stating, if you tolerate racism, delete Uber, to capitalize on the Black Lives Matter movement. Uber and Lyft worked tirelessly to exploit racial justice movements in an effort to cover up the truth. The truth that these corporations rely entirely on the exploitation of workers, the majority of whom are Black, immigrants, and people of color.